Hello, I'm Robert Chisholm, a mechanical engineer from England and in Canada for 12 years, and I'm your host this evening. I'd like to introduce you to my guest speaker, Linda Lalonde, who is policy consultant for the Social Assistance Recipients Council. Tonight, we're going to talk about work ethics in the 21st century, and we look forward to your questions. In part one of this program, we're going to deal with some of the fundamentals which underpin good work ethics. We're all familiar with the problems: layoffs, illegal dismissal lawsuits, family strife and breakdown, unemployment around 10%, mostly involuntary, office politics and backstabbing, so-called early retirement, poor management attitudes, lack of retraining for displaced professionals and workers, preoccupation with image building in the form of resume writing and interview technique in the course of job hunting, and absurdly low odds of any one job application actually leading to a job offer, and difficulties facing prospective exporters, particularly small and medium-sized businesses. All these things are linked to one another to some extent, and all of them are linked to the poor state of the economy and the general failure in Canada to think logically about the problem. Furthermore, private sector business is generally preoccupied with profit, regardless of the social consequences, and there's a general failure in Canada to see people as important factors of production, rather than as an overhead and a burden to be cut when times get tough. So to my mind, the real questions are, firstly, how do we put people back to work and use their productive capacities in tough economic times and dangerously high government deficits? Secondly, what should be done about management attitudes and how should we do it? We'll be touching on this in part one, but we'll deal with it more in part two. Let's now take a look at the first question. Let's now remind ourselves that Canada is not a self-sufficient nation, but a trading nation which must function effectively as a business entity in a world of buyers and sellers. So to improve the economy in general, we must do better in our export markets. All right, you say, exports are now booming, so that argument doesn't make sense. Not so. Our exports may be doing well relative to last month or last year, but at the same time, our traditional exports of natural resource-based products such as steel, lumber and grain are in trouble with foreign competition and continual trade disputes. And good performance in these may simply be the result of decreases in the value of the Canadian dollar against other currencies without necessarily creating additional employment and improving the climate of work ethics. So what's the answer? We must do more to promote exports of advanced technology goods and services. In other words, Canada, as a business entity, must diversify more into other things which will sell to other countries, with particular reference to ones whose economies are expanding, such as China. The next question, of course, is what goods and services? The answer, to my mind, lies in paying careful attention to what countries such as China need and want, as well as continuing to supply the US market, which currently accounts for about 75% of all Canadian exports, and then getting on with doing all we can to help private sector businesses, particularly small and medium-sized ones, export there, so that they will have incentives to create jobs for Canadians and produce an improved climate of work ethics in Canada. All right then, what kinds of incentives are we talking about? Investment capital to set up for doing export business, various forms of assistance for sales and marketing, technical help over getting legal approval to sell one's products in other countries, and retraining for people to fit into the new jobs which will result. These things are needed in order to motivate managers to change their attitudes to professionals and workers, away from the ones which we know about, which are all too common, to ones in which they will hire people permanently because they are needed as valuable factors of production, and in which they will be receptive to the idea of retraining unemployed people as well as those already working for them. Other aspects of management attitudes need to be changed too, but we'll deal with those in part two. Okay, so what products and services are we talking about? Which industries should we be promoting? The environmental protection industry is one example. Here's another vital point. Up to now, the need for retraining has been discussed ad nauseam and in the media, and the question of retraining for what has been asked countless times, and nobody's really seriously answered this latter question. We have to have a logically derived set of retraining objectives based on actual present need or predicted future need, based on clear market indications and deliberate government policy decisions taken in consultation with business and labor to pursue them. And the emphasis must be on export markets. Only if we deal with these questions properly and take the correct actions will we get people back to work and use everybody's productive capacities, which will automatically result in improved workplace ethics and less concern on the part of taxpayers and businesses about the cost of Canada's social programs. All right, fine. If we're going to retrain unemployed people, isn't it going to cost a bomb? Not necessarily so, in my opinion. Here's an example of what we might do. Have private study and research contracts between job seekers and prospective employers, with job guarantees subject to satisfactory completion, to be carried out whilst the job seeker is on UI. This might apply, for example, to such people as unemployed engineers and accountants. There would be a bit of administrative work to draw up the contract, but that would be all in terms of costs over and above UI benefits to the job seeker. This and other schemes should be made available to anyone who's unemployed as a result of layoff, in other words, UI beneficiaries or exhaustees, or social assistance recipients, or to anyone who is employed in work which does not use that person's qualifications, as in the case, for example, of an engineer washing dishes in a restaurant. Back in March this year, I made a presentation and written submission to Lloyd Axworthy's Standing Committee on Human Resources Development, emphasizing these points. Okay, Linda, perhaps you'd like to comment now and perhaps add some things of your own.
Well, I think one of the things that's vital for to change the job market in the future is to look at training that actually leads to real jobs, rather than training people for whatever happens to be the fad of the moment. We need to look at ways to set up co-op training situations where the employer is involved in providing training for their future employee. We need to look at investment by employers in the training of their employees, whether it's giving them time off to take training or investing in people who are currently untrained, putting them back into school and giving them a guarantee of a job when they come out at the end. The other thing that we need to do is looking at ways of supporting the development of small businesses who are in fact providing the majority of the new job opportunities in this country, so that in fact instead of people going and being a cog in a very, very, very huge machine, they can become part of a business that they can work with and watch grow and help the development of, which then does prop up the economy.
Right. I couldn't agree more. Okay, well, I'd like to say to my viewers now, this is an open line show. Please call us with any problems and questions you might have. Well, Linda, where are they all? Okay, well, let me move on to something else which I feel might be of interest. There was a newspaper article in October 1993 about a building products company in Toronto which makes prefabricated plywood panels for use as sections of wall in houses. They'd spent 2.5 years and about $140,000 going through the process of meeting German DIN standards in order to sell the product there, where there's a building boom on. The company president had contacted about 400 other companies in the building products industry to try to get them interested in selling to Germany, but only had about 3 replies. And this took place in an industry which was starving for work. There were problems with perceived cultural difficulties, language barriers, difficulties raising capital to get organized for doing export business, and all sorts of other things. One of the problems we face in creating jobs in this country based on export business and in improving the climate of work ethics as a result is to find ways to overcome these kinds of problems. What one has to remember is that in a trading nation like Canada, if we can achieve big improvements in the country's export performance, then improvements in the domestic economy will follow automatically. And businesses catering to the domestic economy will start to hire people. And then we'll begin to see an improvement in work ethics right across the board. Okay, well, I'd remind our viewers once more that this is an open line show, and we'd like to have your questions or any problems you might care to bring to our attention.
Certainly, I think one of the points you mentioned was long-term commitment by the employer to the employee.
Oh yes, it's very important.
If someone's going to get the kind of development of industry that you're talking about in the housing industry, people have to understand and know that they're making a long-term commitment overseas, and therefore that if they're prepared to make a long-term commitment to a company overseas to use their product, that they can in fact make that commitment to their employees at this end of the bargain.
Yes, indeed. That's what's got to happen. There's no doubt about it. No doubt whatsoever. Another problem we have to deal with is the business of getting existing training programs to work better than they do at the moment. A personal experience of mine, I think, will help to illustrate the problems here. Getting training programs to work properly is all part of the business of improving workplace ethics. There's a program which is run jointly by the federal government and a private consulting company based in Ottawa called On Site. And it has two objectives. One is to help unemployed professionals and engineers, chemists, and managers get back to work. The second objective is to help private and public sector organizations solve their waste and energy management problems. In other words, it's an environmental protection type of thing. Now, I had a problem with this a year or two ago in that after I went on UI benefits, having completed a 6-month contract, I was told that there were no places on the program. And when places did become available, I was told I was no longer eligible because my UI benefits had run out. And this is a program which is funded by the unemployment. This is a program which is funded from UI funds. All this happened in spite of my having complained to my MP, who in fact wrote twice about the problem. And when this didn't produce results, I contacted a second MP in Montreal, who intervened directly with then Minister of Immigration and Employment, Bernard Valcourt, but it still didn't produce results, which was a curious state of affairs, to say the least of it, when it is considered that the environmental protection industry is one of the ones which is supposedly expanding quite rapidly, and is one of the industries in which we need to be making more efforts to export.
I think you've demonstrated one of the worst problems with training programs that we have now is that quite often they're set up to meet a government objective and not to meet the needs of the people that they're looking at training. They're notorious for being available to the wrong people at the right time and the right people at the wrong time.
Yes.
That if you, for instance, you may only need part of a program, but if you want to enroll in the program, you have to take the whole kettle of fish. You can't say, well, I only need to take part C. You have to take parts A to E in order to get part C. So in fact, they're wasting the resources of providing A, B, D,
Yes.
and E to someone who doesn't need them, and there may be people lined up down the road and around the corner who in fact need all those 4 components.
Right.
There are programs where they have people on waiting lists who may get a job offer, and all they need is one little segment of the thing. But no, you can't. You can't. If you have a job offer, that doesn't mean that we'll, hurry you up on the list. It means when your number comes up, it comes up. By which time, of course, your job offer's expired.
Yes.
Things like people who can get jobs but can't get daycare spaces, who can get jobs but can't get the necessary equipment to, whether it's safety equipment or whatever, to be able to actually take the job. And of course, you don't have the money until you've been in the job for several weeks to actually pay for the equipment you needed on day one.
Right.
So that the question arises of whether the targeting of job training dollars or UI dollars in some of these cases is being done in the most appropriate way.
I agree, 100%. Okay. Right. Okay. Whoops, my thing's come off. Well, Linda, let me ask you a question. What did you think of my suggestion concerning private study and research contracts between a prospective employer and a job seeker, which would be carried out whilst the job seeker is on UI, and thus cost the government virtually nothing in terms of training funds?
I think
this is something that could be workable?
It's quite useful because both the employer and the employee get sort of a dress rehearsal of how it would be to work with each other, and you get a feeling of what the person's capabilities are without having to commit yourself to a permanent job offer or contract or whatever. And for a lot of people who are going back into work or who are changing their line of work, it gives you an opportunity to get a trial run before you're committed by having taken a job and made a commitment to that company. So it does give you both sides a little look at each other.
Well, I agree. I think this is a very interesting point, because otherwise, one of the major questions to my mind here is, how are people who have been out of the workforce for a long time to demonstrate their capabilities and get back in again? And I think you made a very interesting point in that this type of contract could in fact constitute a useful trial period to enable a prospective employee and the employer to get to know one another.
It's one of the ironies of social assistance that in a great many areas, not so much in Ottawa Carleton, but in other jurisdictions, people are forbidden from doing volunteer work. They're forbidden from doing anything that isn't a real, quote, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, traditional type of job.
Yes, yes, indeed.
They're barred from just taking those kind of exploratory ventures with an employer.
Yes, I know what you mean. I've been reading a case of just this in the papers in the past few days. I forget the details now, but I know what it is you're getting at.
And it seems a bit ridiculous that people who are prepared to try something out are being told, well, you can try it out as long as you make a permanent commitment to an employer, but if you want to just, if neither you nor the employer wants to jump off the bridge together, if you just want to put your feet in the water, that's a no-no. You can't do that. It has to be all or nothing. And there are a lot of people who would be prepared to check out other types of employment, different ways of working and so on, if in fact the systems would support them, whether it's unemployment insurance, social assistance, or whatever.
Right. I would like to remind our viewers once more that this is an open line show, so please feel free to call in with your questions or any problems you'd like to bring up with us. Okay. Well, what did you think about my ideas concerning the fundamentals about how to get this economy going again in terms of helping prospective exporters who may be facing difficulties as a means of generating jobs based on export businesses, which, if produced, will automatically lead to the domestic economy picking up? Do you feel that my theory might be a sound one?
Well, certainly, if you're looking at ways if you have a factory that can only work at efficiently when it has, say, 40,000 units going out a day, and the domestic market is only going to absorb 10,000 of those, unless you have some alternate market, you might as well just close the door and go home. And if you look at diversifying, the more you spread your possibilities of marketing, the more likely you are to be able to carry the employees that you have at home and be able to carry the market you have and naturally, if you bring the price down by increasing the number of units that you're producing, obviously it's going to be a better seller on the domestic market, and therefore you pick up your business domestically as well as overseas.
Without a doubt, I agree with that 100%. It helps, of course, if businesses can sell their products in the domestic market before going overseas, in order for those products to prove themselves in the hands of a reasonable number of customers. Of course, having said that, we have to overcome some problems with marketing those companies' products and services, when at the same time many companies may not have the resources individually to get involved with doing export business. With respect to this question, there was, to my mind, a very interesting article in the Globe and Mail on Tuesday June the 8th, 1993, entitled Canadian Specialists Tackle Asian Market. And this mentioned a company called Canora Asia Incorporated, which has bases in Jakarta and Calgary. It was federally incorporated in May 1993 and was the result of a 2-year effort involving Canadian government officials, industry representatives, and Southeast Asian institutions. And it was emphasizing on selling solid waste management systems, wastewater and hazardous waste treatment, water treatment systems, and technical support services to clients in Brunei, Indonesia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. Among other things, it involved shareholder agreements between Canadian member companies and Canora Asia Incorporated. The objective of the whole exercise being to make it easier for small companies, which individually might not have had the resources, to get set up for doing export business, with particular reference to marketing their products over there. Now, I thought this was very, very interesting, and I personally believe we need to see more of these kinds of consortiums.
I think that applies not just for export, but also for the domestic market, where you can penetrate a market if you've got all the different components through different companies, whereas a small company on their own starting out doesn't have the advertising money, doesn't have the time and everything else to do the outside marketing.
Right.
So it's sort of peer support helps you get through, as well as merging your external costs.
I agree. That's a very good point. What do you think of this this business of how we should set about getting legal approval for companies to sell their products in other countries? Is this a question that you've thought about before? Or is it something that you felt not to lie within your purview to date?
Well, I think one of the questions is how much support is the government giving to companies that want to expand overseas, and that's one of the main areas in which they can sort of ease the path of companies that want to go overseas, is through the legal agreements and so on that have to be done when you're dealing in another country.
Right. Well, what should we deal with next? I'd like to remind our viewers once more, this is an open line show. Please feel free to call in with your questions, and do please bring to our attention any problems that you'd like to raise. We'd be glad to talk to you about them. Well, I guess we're going to hear from somebody one of these days. One can never predict what's going to happen in a show such as this.
Yeah.
It's the first time I've done it. This is something of an adventure.
Which you hadn't planned to be quite such an adventure.
Heading into the unknown. We never know what we're going to find, do we?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy. I'm wondering what more we can do to improve communications between small businesses seeking to do export business and government departments such as the Canadian Export Development Corporation, who might be in a position to help them, if in fact, assuming that this is in fact a major problem.
Well, I think part of the problem with any small business is the amount of paperwork, the amount of sort of government bureaucracy hoops and so on that you have to go through to get anything from the government, that often people shy away from dealing with any government bureaucracy because it's probably going to be harder than not doing whatever not having whatever the benefit would be in the end of having gone through those hoops and played the games with the government and all those kind of things. So any kind of simplifying of process, procedures, rip up a few forms, so on, that makes it easier for people to deal with a government department, particularly people whose forte is not dealing with government departments and filling out forms, whose forte is developing some kind of business venture. It has to make it more productive in the long run.
Right.
So certainly the government doesn't make it awfully easy for anyone to get help, and it certainly isn't a sort of a hospitable environment for the average person. If you're a small business person with 2, 3, or 5, 10 employees, you have enough to do just keeping your business on the go, keeping your taxes paid, making sure that payroll is met, making sure that your widgets are being cranked out on time and that they're good quality and whatever else, without having to spend months figuring out how to fill out forms to access a government program that may in fact be, quote, set up to benefit you, unquote.
Right. Hey, let me ask you another question, Linda. What do you think of the general state of ethics in the Canadian workplace today?
Well, if you believe what you read in the papers, which of course some of us don't, there is a real problem with the rate of, for instance, employee fraud and all these kinds of things, which I think is quite indicative of the fact that people don't have the commitment that they, I won't say how many years ago, once did have to their employer, and part of that is a result of the lack of commitment on the part of the employer to the employee. If I know that as long as I come in on time and do my job and produce what I'm supposed to produce and go on the way I'm supposed to do, and don't insult the company president's wife at the Christmas party, that I'm going to have a job and be employed for the next whatever period of time, then I'm more likely to be honest in my dealings with the company. But I think a lot of people have reached the point that there are so many insecurities in their employment situation that they don't have the commitment, and employers aren't as honest in their dealings with their employees as they once would have been, because you knew it was a long-term commitment. You had to live with Fred till he retired, so you better buckle down and deal straight up with that person. And those kind of long-term relationships don't happen very much anymore.
No, they don't, do they? They don't. There's a terrific emphasis on part-time work these days. That's for sure. Okay, Linda. Well, we have a caller. So let's see what this caller wants to talk to us about. Hello, caller. Go ahead, please. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes, I was wondering whether your guest and perhaps yourself might be able to shed some light on a subject I saw on television recently about how a lot of the larger industries are using systems to monitor email being transferred from one worker to another, whether it's within the plant or outside of the plant, installation of video cameras to monitor work being done by employees. Basically, the Big Brother coming into effect in the workplace, and how do with the work ethics? I guess the employer's interest is in efficiency, but where does the employee stand? What are the rights of the employee?
Well, I personally am not in a position to comment on the legal rights of the employee in a case like this. But what I can say is that it quite obviously leads to a rather nasty atmosphere in the workplace, which we can all do without. And one suspects that it may be motivated, in fact, by a desire on the part of the employer to make employees feel insecure. Linda, would you like to comment about this?
I think this is indicative of the breakdown between the relationship between employee and employer, where 50 years ago, Joe, the president of the company, knew Fred, the plant worker, and then the person on the front line, and I think it's a sort of a general breakdown of trust in the whole of society, that people no longer presume that employees are doing their work, that they're not chit-chatting with their neighbor across the corridor for more than 23 seconds every 4 hours or something. You see, the email business, which, okay, every now and again somebody might throw in an email to their brother-in-law at the firm across the town. What's the frequency of that? It's sort of I can't sit down and say to you as my employee, I have a bit of a concern with what you're doing with your time. I have to sort of sneak around a back door and find a way of finding out whether you are in fact doing what you're employed to do.
But as long as the employee is doing their work and is efficient in doing the work to the time that they have ability to send an email across town or whatever, where does the employer have the right to, is it because I'm using the employer's equipment that maybe that gives them the right?
I think there's sort of an implication that if you have the 37 seconds it takes you to zap a message across town, that you are in fact you're taking that 37 seconds away from Joe, the president of your company, the fellow who's paying you to work 8 hours a day from 9 to 5. And I think you end up with people who almost build within their employees, they build a desire to find ways to get around to take that 37 seconds out of Joe's day, because there's an implied there's an insult implied, actually, that says that you are in fact ripping me off, and I'm going to prove it because I'm going to spend whatever hundreds of thousands of dollars it costs me to put in a video camera above everybody's desk and so on. And so people resent the implication that you are in fact defrauding your employer, and will just go to further lengths to do what the thing is that your employer really doesn't want you to do.
Right. Well, that's my concern too, is the money that some businesses invest in supposedly increasing efficiency by monitoring the work of the employees, whereas they could be maybe hiring other people who are qualified to do the jobs but aren't able to get, there's people out there who are qualified to work in that workplace, have the understanding and ability to operate the equipment or whatever, but the companies are spending money to monitor existing employees, to try and increase their efficiency.
Well, I think too, from the employer's end of it, he's looking at this saying, I'm in an economic crunch, I've got, everything coming in on me, I have to work 24 hours a day, 25 hours a day, whatever, and I expect my employees to do that too, and if I'm paying you 8 hours wages, I expect you to be 100% on for 8 hours, and that's it. Whereas, there's a certain, obviously if you're happy with your work, you're going to do a better job than if you're not happy with your work. If you're comfortable with the atmosphere in which you work, you're going to do a much better job and be more likely to have fewer errors. If I'm sitting at a desk trying to, let's say I'm making widgets and I'm have widgets flying by me at 20 widgets a minute, and I'm sort of looking up around to see who's watching me and who's looking at me, whether it's the the shop foreman or whoever. I'm not going to be as efficient at making widgets as I would be if I was just doing that one thing. So that it's sort of a catch-22. I think the employer loses more than they're gaining in the stopping you from whipping off that email across to your brother-in-law on the other side of town.
Right. I just had one brief other question concerning job sharing. Do we see job sharing? I know it was a big thing a couple of years ago that a lot of places were considering it and trying to implement it. and now you don't hear much about it. How effective was that? I think it worked more to the benefit of employees and employing, again, people who are qualified to work but maybe can't commit to a full-time job and made a lot of part-time jobs. Where is that now, and where do we see that going in the 21st century?
Well, I think that's a very, very interesting question. Personally, I believe that job sharing of the form that you describe has its place in that it can be seen as a temporary solution to the problem of a lack of full-time jobs. On the other hand, I don't believe it can be seen as a long-term solution to this country's problems, and therefore we still have to pay attention to the question of how do we create full-time jobs in this country. We've got to pay attention to the basics, to my mind, of how to solve that problem, along the lines that I was suggesting earlier.
I think this is one of the really dicey issues is there are people who will voluntarily job share, and certainly that's to be encouraged, because in a lot of cases, because of family responsibilities, because of personal medical situations, and so on, people may not be able to work full-time. The other thing that we have to, I think, look at is in times when we don't have jobs for everyone, is it fair for 4 people to be doing 5 days of work in a company when in fact 5 people could be doing 4 days of work each? Does it matter to me as a taxpayer whether I receive $250 this week, let's say, or and someone else is out of work? Me and myself and 3 other people are employed, earning $250, and someone's out of work and being supported otherwise by the system? Or does it make sense for 5 people to receive $200 a week and not, I mean, I probably walk away with $200 a week at the end anyway, because the government's taking my other 50 to support someone else who's not able to work. There comes a point where people shouldn't be allowed to sort of monopolize the jobs that they have, when in fact other people are in need just as much of that employment as they are. So that there are situations where people could be sharing jobs, maybe not on a permanent basis, maybe not in the sense of 50-50, which is normally what's talked about for job sharing.
Well, I'm not talking about companies forcing people into it, but allowing employees the option, like with maternity leave, or
right.
or if a family member is taken ill, and having to take that time off, either time off like going away for a long period of time, or just not being able to work a full 40-hour week.
I agree. I think this is a very good point. My major concern, however, although I'm speaking from a certain point of view and coming from a certain direction, is with the problem of job sharing arising from sheer lack of work, sheer lack of full-time work, that is. And this is not only, the lack of full-time work is not only leading to what might be termed enforced job sharing, it is also forcing people to take part-time jobs and work less than a full week, or juggle several part-time jobs in order to try to make up a full work week, simply because they have to, due to the lack of full-time jobs. So in fact, there's a number of different ways of looking at this. Job sharing has its place, it has its merits, there's no doubt about that. On the other hand, I think there is a big problem with a lack of full-time jobs in this country.
I think, though, that you do have an awful lot of people for whom it makes sense, both for the employer and the employee, to allow them to work part of a full work week. If, for instance, someone has a sick child at home that they need to be taking more time, does it make sense for an employer to have put, several years of training, have developed that person to work the way the company works, and so on and so forth, to just say, well, either you stay full-time or you leave full-time?
Exactly, they'd be eliminating a valuable resource to the company.
Yeah, you've thrown away
Very
whatever
good point.
investment
I
you've
agree.
made in the employee, and I think that's one of the things that employers need to be looking at more and more is what kind of investment they've already made in an employee and how to keep that investment within the company. Because obviously, if you say no to me today to job sharing, I'm going to go down the road to, Harry down the street, who will hire me in a minute and take advantage of all the training you've put into, my capability to work within his company now.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Well, I thank you for your time and your comments.
Well, it's our pleasure. It's been most interesting talking to you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's see if we have another caller online. Hello, caller. Go ahead, please. I don't think there's anyone there. Okay, Linda. Well, I guess we'll have to prime the pump again.
I think the issue of job sharing, both job sharing and sharing jobs, which are two slightly different things, are quite important, because I'm not sure whether people realize just how much it's costing the average person to support people not working, and the amount of discouragement and the loss of potential for people who are left without employment for a long period of time is
Right.
it's quite disgraceful in this country, for people who have the potential to work and can't find employment. And there's an awful lot of types of work where if you're out of work for a period of time, you in fact lose your ability to be employable. I spoke not very long ago with a fellow who was in the computer industry who had been out of work for I think about 8 months,
Right.
and knew that every minute that he was not working, he was losing his marketability. Because until, if he wasn't working and keeping up with all the latest developments, he was fast outdating himself. And,
Right.
for a lot of people to come and do the, even if it's volunteer work, part-time work, whatever, as long as you can keep yourself on up to date with your training and experience and so on, is very, very important.
I agree. It's no easy matter either. As for me, well, I had a somewhat unpleasant experience when I came to this country 12 years ago, in that I came here to work for SNC Lavalin, or rather it was known as SNC back then in 1982, for what was supposed to be a permanent job to last at least 2 years. But I was laid off after only 15 weeks. For a variety of reasons, I found myself obliged to sue them for illegal dismissal. Finally got to court only in May 1991, and culminated with my seizing the company's bank account for refusal to pay up in accordance with an order of the Quebec Superior Court. And the president of the company, Guy Saint-Pierre, was then, and still is, a director of the Royal Bank, where the company still has its account. So for that and other reasons, I think we do have, we've got big problems with management attitudes in this country, which are producing a very poor standard of work ethics in some cases. But fundamentally, the problem is is quite simply one of lack of jobs in this country. If we had lots of jobs for people to go to, we wouldn't run into those kinds of problems, and there'd be fewer illegal dismissal lawsuits. One would see less family strife and breakdown, fewer people on UI, welfare benefits, and all the rest of it. So it all comes down to the question of, if we're going to improve the standard of work ethics in this country, we've got to get at it from the point of view of the fundamental causes and effects which lead to jobs being created. And as I said at the beginning, I believe this really depends on improving our export performance, with particular reference to the high technology sector. What do you make of that one, Linda?
For people who are dependent on continued employment to support their families, it's very disruptive and very difficult to be put out of work simply because the government has changed its policy around such and such, and or the government isn't supporting something that it previously did support, or that the government's not taking advantage of opportunities that are presenting themselves, whether it's export or domestic things.
Right. Well, for my part, I think there's also a big question of are we going to be able to get our acts together in this country in time? In other words, before we start running into a really big debt crisis, there's been all sorts of concerns expressed in the media over the last year or two about the possibility that we could be heading for a big debt crisis, an international debt crisis, that is. And if that happens, we're in real trouble, far worse than we're seeing now, or what we've seen at any time in the last 12 years that I've been in Canada. And fundamentally, I think the answer to avoiding this kind of a scenario is to do all we can to improve this country's export performance.
Well, I think one of the other things too is that it's important for the government, if they're handing money out for whatever reason, whether it's to prop a company up or to provide grants for, new and different technologies and so on, to tie the granting or donation, in many cases of money, to development of jobs and to guarantees that those jobs will be maintained, to guarantees that they'll be maintained if it's an international company, that they'll be maintained in Canada as opposed to in other countries, and also to tie the funding of companies to the development of new workers, as well as to continuing workers who are presently in the job force. Because I think one of the things that we have to be pretty concerned about is the number of young people who are lining up outside employment offices, who are going to have a long and tedious history of standing outside employment offices if things don't change pretty soon. And I think we only need to look at, for instance, the UK to see what happens when kids don't have any prospects of employment in the future.
Right. I agree. Well, time is nearly up. So from my standpoint, appearing on this show has been a very, very interesting experience. We've attempted to deal with some extremely difficult subject matter tonight. We've not had as many phone calls as we might have done, but that's the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. Is there anything else? Is there anything else you'd like to say, Linda, before we finish? We've got just about a minute and a half left, I think now. 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think we've touched on a lot of different ways that employers and employees can together work to improve the climate in which they're all working, and I think those are the important things that people need to remember, that this is in fact not an us-them thing, that we're theoretically all in this together, and if the employer goes down, so do I as the employee, and vice versa. So that the question of ethical treatment of each other becomes in fact the treatment that you're doling out to yourself, not just to the other side of this equation.
Oh, I agree. It's a two-way street. It always was, and it always will be. No doubt about it.
Whatever.
Well, okay, well, I guess it's about time to wrap up now, Linda. So I would like to thank you for coming on this show with me. It's been a very interesting experience from my standpoint. I would like to thank McLean Hunter TV for putting this show on. I would like to thank all the staff here, the studio staff and the director, for allowing me the opportunity to say some things which I felt had to be said. I would like to thank our audience and bid you all good night. And it's been most enjoyable from my standpoint.